The cathedral bells tolled with deafening finality as Lady Beatrice Ashford stood frozen at the altar, her sister's wedding gown heavy upon her shoulders. Moments earlier, Lady Catherine had fled through the vestry door, leaving behind only a tear-stained note and the wreckage of a political alliance years in the making. Now, as the Duke of Thornfield lifted the veil with hands that trembled with barely contained fury, Beatrice met his steel-grey eyes and saw the precise moment recognition struck, and with it, a hatred so pure it stole the breath from her lungs. "You," he whispered, his voice a blade wrapped in silk, and in that single word she understood. She had not merely married a stranger, she had wed her family's greatest enemy. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Manor, with the pale, hesitant quality peculiar to early spring in the English countryside. Lady Beatrice Ashford sat at her writing desk in the drawing room, her pen hovering above a half-finished letter she had no intention of completing. Beyond the glass, the gardens stretched in geometric perfection, every hedge trimmed, every path swept, every rose bush pruned to within an inch of its life, beautiful certainly, but lifeless in its precision. Much like her existence, she thought, then immediately chastised herself for the melodrama. "Beatrice, darling, you're slouching again." Her mother's voice carried across the room with the particular sharpness reserved for correcting posture and other moral failings. Lady Ashford swept into the drawing room, her morning dress a confection of lavender silk that rustled with self-importance. "A lady of your station must maintain proper deportment at all times, especially now. Especially now." The words had become a refrain in recent months, repeated with increasing frequency as the date approached. The date that would see her elder sister, Catherine, wed to Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Thornfield, in what their father called the alliance of the century. Beatrice straightened her spine obediently, though rebellion flickered in her chest like a candle flame in a draught. "Yes, Mamma. Catherine is with the modiste for her final fitting," her mother continued, settling onto the settee with practiced grace. "The gown is exquisite, French lace, seed pearls, the finest silk from London. The Duke will be quite overcome." Beatrice doubted very much that the Duke of Thornfield was a man given to being overcome by anything, least of all a wedding gown. She had seen him only twice, once at a distance during a London ball, and once up close when he had come to formalize the betrothal. Both times she had been struck by the coldness in his grey eyes, the rigid set of his jaw, the way he looked at her father with something that might have been contempt, poorly disguised as courtesy. The Ashfords and the Blackwoods had been rivals for 3 generations, their estates bordering each other in Derbyshire, their political allegiances perpetually opposed, their social circles overlapping just enough to ensure maximum discomfort at every gathering. The feud had begun over a disputed property line and had metastasized over the decades into something far more personal and far more bitter, which made the betrothal all the more extraordinary and all the more calculated. "It is a great honor," her mother was saying, her voice taking on the dreamy quality she adopted when discussing matters of social advancement. "The Duchess of Thornfield. Catherine will be one of the most powerful women in England, and you, my dear, will benefit enormously from the connection. Why, I shouldn't be surprised if we secure a match for you with an earl at the very least." Beatrice's stomach tightened. She was 20 years old, 2 years younger than Catherine, and while her sister possessed the golden beauty and placid temperament that made her the ideal aristocratic bride, Beatrice had always been the difficult one. Too clever, too curious, too prone to asking questions that made dinner guests uncomfortable. Her father had once told her, not unkindly, that intelligence in a woman was like salt in a dessert. A little might enhance, but too much ruined the whole dish. She had stopped asking questions after that, at least aloud, "I'm sure Catherine will make a lovely duchess," Beatrice said carefully, returning her attention to her letter. It was addressed to her former governess, Miss Hartley, who had retired to Bath, and was the only person with whom Beatrice could correspond honestly, though even those letters required a certain degree of self-censorship. "Lovely?" Her mother's laugh was brittle. "She will be magnificent. The Duke is one of the wealthiest men in England, Beatrice. Thornfield Hall has 40 bedrooms, 40, and the London house in Mayfair is said to be a palace. Catherine will want for nothing. Except affection," Beatrice thought. "Except warmth. Except any indication that her future husband viewed her as anything more than a strategic acquisition." But these were not thoughts one voiced. Not in the Ashford household, where duty and advancement were the twin pillars upon which all decisions rested. The door opened, and Catherine herself entered, followed by their lady's maid carrying an enormous hat-box. Beatrice's sister moved with the liquid grace of someone who had never questioned her place in the world, her blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her complexion like porcelain. She was objectively beautiful, the sort of beauty that made men write terrible poetry and women feel inadequate. "The fitting went well?" their mother asked eagerly. Catherine's smile was serene, practiced. "Perfectly, Mama. Madame Rousseau says it's her finest work." But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something Beatrice couldn't quite identify. Anxiety? Fear? It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Wonderful! Only 3 more days, my darling. 3 more days until you become a duchess." Lady Ashford rose, kissing Catherine's cheek with unusual tenderness. "I must speak with Cook about the wedding breakfast. Beatrice, do try to accomplish something useful today. Perhaps you might practice your pianoforte. Your playing has grown quite rusty." When their mother had departed in a rustle of silk, Catherine sank onto the chair opposite Beatrice's desk, her perfect posture finally relaxing. For a moment, she looked very young and very tired. "Are you well?" Beatrice asked quietly. Catherine's laugh was hollow. "Well, I am to be married in 3 days to a man who despises everything our family represents. A man who looks at me as though I were a particularly distasteful business transaction he's been forced to complete. But yes, Beatrice, I am perfectly well." The bitterness in her sister's voice was shocking. Catherine never complained. Catherine never questioned. Catherine was the obedient daughter, the perfect lady, the one who coloured within every line society had drawn. "You could refuse," Beatrice said, though she knew it was impossible. "You could what?" Catherine's blue eyes were suddenly fierce. "Disgrace our family? Destroy father's political ambitions? Condemn you to spinsterhood because no respectable family would ally themselves with the Ashfords after such a scandal?" She shook her head. "No, Beatrice, I could not. This is my duty. This is what daughters of our station do. We marry well, we secure alliances, we produce heirs, and if we're very fortunate, we learn to tolerate our husbands." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with resignation and something darker. Beatrice wanted to argue, to insist that there must be another way, but she knew her sister was right. In their world, women were currency, and Catherine was about to be spent on the most expensive purchase their family had ever made. "I wish it were different," Beatrice said finally. "So do I." Catherine rose, smoothing her skirts. "But wishes are for children and fools. We are neither." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "The Duke arrives tomorrow for the final preparations. Father expects us both at dinner. Do wear the blue silk. It brings out your eyes." When she was gone, Beatrice returned to her letter, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself staring out at the manicured gardens, at the cage of beauty that surrounded them all, and wondering if Catherine would find any happiness at all in her 40-bedroom prison. The answer, she suspected, was no. The morning of the wedding dawned with unseasonable warmth, as though even the weather conspired to mock the coldness of the union about to take place. St. Michael's Cathedral stood resplendent in the heart of London, its Gothic spires piercing a cloudless sky. its doors thrown open to receive the cream of English society. Carriages lined the streets for half a mile in each direction, their occupants eager to witness the impossible. An Ashford marrying a Blackwood, two great families united at last. Inside the bride's chamber at Ashford House, chaos reigned beneath a veneer of silk and lace. "She's gone," the lady's maid whispered, her face pale as death. "Lady Catherine is gone." Beatrice stood frozen, her bridesmaid's gown of pale rose silk suddenly feeling like a shroud. In her hand, she clutched the note her sister had pressed into her palm not 10 minutes earlier, when everyone else had been distracted by a supposed issue with the veil. The paper trembled as she read it again, though she had already memorized every desperate word. "Dearest B, forgive me, I cannot do this. I cannot marry a man who looks at me with such contempt, who sees me only as a means to humiliate our father, who has made it abundantly clear that this marriage is his revenge for every slight our families have exchanged. I am fleeing to Aunt Agatha in Edinburgh. She will shelter me. Tell them I am a coward if you must, but know that I would rather be a coward than spend my life as a trophy of war. I love you. Forgive me. See." What do you mean, gone?" Lady Ashford's voice rose to a pitch that made the crystal chandelier tremble. "The ceremony begins in 20 minutes. The Duke is already at the cathedral. The Archbishop himself is presiding." The maid wrung her hands. "Her travelling cloak is missing, my lady, and the back door to the mews was left unlatched." Beatrice watched her mother's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally a rage so profound it seemed to age her 10 years in as many seconds. Her father, Lord Ashford, stood by the window, his ruddy complexion draining to grey as he grasped the magnitude of the catastrophe. "This will destroy us," he said quietly. "Utterly and completely destroy us." "We must send word to the Duke at once," Lady Ashford said, her voice shaking. "We must explain. We must—" "Explain what?" Lord Ashford turned from the window, his eyes hollow. "That our daughter has jilted the Duke of Thornfield at the altar? That she has made fools of us all before the entire aristocracy? There is no explanation that will suffice, Margaret. We are ruined." Beatrice's mind raced. She thought of Catherine, fleeing north toward freedom and Aunt Agatha's unconventional household. She thought of her parents, their ambitions crumbling to ash. She thought of the hundreds of guests already seated in the cathedral, the Duke waiting at the altar, the scandal that would echo through drawing rooms for generations. And then, with a clarity that felt almost like madness, she knew what she had to do. "I'll go," she heard herself say. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. "What did you say?" her mother whispered. Beatrice straightened her spine, channeling every lesson in deportment she had ever received. "I'll take Catherine's place. I'll marry the Duke." The silence that followed was absolute. "Don't be absurd," her father said finally. "You're not the contracted bride. The betrothal agreement specifies Catherine by name. The Duke would never—" "The Duke wants an Ashford bride to seal the alliance," Beatrice interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "The guests want a wedding. Society wants a spectacle. I can provide all of that." She turned to her mother. "The veil covers my face. Catherine and I are similar enough in height and build. If I say nothing until after the vows are complete, until the register is signed, it will be too late for him to refuse without creating an even greater scandal." "This is madness," Lady Ashford breathed, but there was a desperate hope kindling in her eyes. "This is survival," Beatrice countered. "If Catherine jilts the Duke, we are destroyed. But if I marry him in her stead, the alliance holds. The contract is fulfilled. Our family is saved." Lord Ashford stared at his younger daughter as though seeing her for the first time. "He will despise you for the deception." "He already despises our family," Beatrice said simply. "At least this way, the despising will be directed at me alone, and Catherine will be free." The clock on the mantel chimed the quarter hour. 15 minutes until the ceremony. Her parents exchanged a long look, an entire conversation passing between them in silence. Finally, her father nodded once, sharply. "Do it!" The next quarter hour passed in a blur of frantic activity. Catherine's wedding gown was adjusted hastily to fit Beatrice's slightly smaller frame. The veil, that blessed concealing veil, was arranged to obscure her face completely. Her mother's hands shook as she fastened the pearl necklace around Beatrice's throat. "You are saving us all," Lady Ashford whispered, and for the first time in Beatrice's memory there were tears in her mother's eyes. "I will never forget this sacrifice." Sacrifice. The word echoed in Beatrice's mind as the carriage carried her through London streets toward the cathedral. Through the window, she could see the crowds gathered to glimpse the bride, their faces eager with curiosity. They had no idea they were about to witness not a wedding, but a substitution, a fraud, a desperate gambit by a desperate family. The cathedral's interior was a masterpiece of soaring arches and jeweled lights streaming through stained glass windows. Every pew was filled with the most powerful families in England, their faces turned expectantly toward the entrance. At the altar, flanked by his groomsmen, stood Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield. Even from a distance, he was imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the severity of its expression. He wore his formal attire with military precision, every line sharp, every detail perfect. And his eyes, those cold grey eyes, were fixed on the cathedral doors with an intensity that made Beatrice's courage falter. He was waiting for Catherine, for the golden, beautiful, obedient Catherine who would have made him a perfect, passionless duchess. Instead, he was getting Beatrice. The organ swelled with the opening notes of the processional. Her father appeared at her side, his arm rigid beneath her trembling hand. "It's not too late," he murmured. "We could still—" "No," Beatrice said firmly. "We couldn't." And then they were moving, processing down the endless aisle as hundreds of eyes tracked their progress. Beatrice kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, on the Duke's broad back, on the altar, on her fate. Each step felt like walking toward an execution, but she forced herself to maintain the slow, measured pace expected of a bride. The Duke turned as she approached. Even through the veil, she could feel the weight of his scrutiny. He was studying her, she realized, trying to discern something through the layers of lace and tulle. Did he suspect? Could he tell? Her father placed her hand in the Duke's, and Beatrice felt the shock of contact. His palm warm and calloused against her gloved fingers, his grip firm to the point of pain. He was holding her hand like one might hold a weapon, warily, with barely restrained hostility. The Archbishop began the ceremony, his voice resonating through the vaulted space. Beatrice heard none of it. Her entire being was focused on maintaining the deception, on keeping her head bowed, on not allowing her voice to betray her when the time came to speak her vows. If any person can show just cause why these two may not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever, hold their peace. The silence stretched. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then let us proceed," the Archbishop intoned. "Alexander Edmund Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield, wilt thou have this woman to be thy wedded wife?" "I will." His voice was deep, clipped, devoid of emotion, the voice of a man fulfilling an obligation. "And wilt thou, Lady Catherine Elizabeth Ashford, have this man to be thy wedded husband?" This was the moment, the point of no return. "I will," Beatrice whispered, pitching her voice slightly higher, softer than her natural tone. The Duke's hand tightened fractionally on hers. Had he noticed? Did he know? The vows continued. The rings were exchanged, a heavy gold band that felt like a shackle sliding onto her finger. And then, finally, the words she had been dreading. "You may now kiss the bride." The Duke's hands moved to her veil with deliberate slowness. Beatrice held her breath, her entire body rigid with tension. This was it, the moment of revelation, the moment when everything would either succeed or catastrophically fail. He lifted the veil. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath with her, Recognition struck his features like a physical blow, his eyes widening fractionally, his jaw clenching, a muscle jumping in his cheek. For one terrible moment, Beatrice thought he might denounce her then and there, might tear up the register and declare the marriage void before God and all assembled. Instead, he leaned close, his lips nearly brushing her ear, and whispered with a venom that made her blood run cold. "You." And then, before she could respond, before she could explain or apologize or beg for understanding, he kissed her. It was not the chaste, ceremonial kiss expected at a wedding. It was a claiming, a punishment. His mouth hard against hers, his hand gripping the back of her neck, holding her in place as though she might flee as her sister had done. When he finally released her, his eyes were chips of grey ice. "Smile," he commanded under his breath. "Smile for our guests, Lady Thornfield. You've gotten what you wanted. Now play your part." Beatrice smiled. It felt like her face might crack from the effort. The organ thundered triumphantly as they processed back down the aisle, now husband and wife, duke and duchess, bound together by vows and deception, and a hatred so palpable she could taste it like copper on her tongue. In the vestry, as soon as the door closed behind them and they were momentarily alone, the duke released her arm as though she burned him. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where is Catherine?" "Gone," Beatrice said, lifting her chin. "She couldn't go through with it, so I took her place." "You took her place." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You deceived me. You made a mockery of this ceremony, of these vows, of—" He broke off, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've saved my family from ruin," Beatrice said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "And I've fulfilled the terms of your betrothal contract. You wanted an Ashford bride. You have one. I wanted Catherine." The words shouldn't have stung. She had known, of course, that he had no interest in her personally, but hearing it stated so baldly with such contempt felt like a slap. "Well, Your Grace," she said, injecting as much dignity as she could muster into her tone, "you have me instead, and we are legally wed. There is nothing to be done about it now." His eyes raked over her, and she saw the exact moment he realized she was right. The marriage was consummated in law, if not in fact. The register was signed. The vows were spoken before God and witnesses. To annul it now would require admitting he had been duped, would create a scandal even greater than a simple jilting. He was trapped, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he said softly, dangerously. "You may have won this battle through trickery and deceit, but I promise you, Lady Thornfield, you will regret this deception for the rest of your life." Before Beatrice could respond, the vestry door opened and the wedding party flooded in, all congratulations and champagne, and she was swept away into the nightmare of the wedding breakfast, where she smiled until her face ached and accepted congratulations for a marriage that had been doomed before it even began. Thornfield Hall rose from the Derbyshire landscape like a monument to power and old money, all grey stone and mullioned windows, surrounded by parkland that stretched to the horizon. Beatrice had seen it from a distance all her life, the great rival estate that bordered her family's lands, but she had never imagined she would enter it as its mistress. The journey from London had been conducted in absolute silence. The Duke had ridden alongside the carriage rather than within it, leaving Beatrice alone with her thoughts and her lady's maid, who kept her eyes downcast and her hands folded, as though afraid to acknowledge the tension that crackled in the air like an approaching storm. When they arrived, the household staff assembled in the entrance hall with military precision. The butler, a silver-haired man named Pemberton, welcomed her with impeccable courtesy that didn't quite reach his eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. Daventry, curtsied with the barest minimum of respect. They knew. Somehow they all knew that she was not the bride their master had expected. "Show the Duchess to her chambers," the Duke said coldly, not looking at Beatrice. "I will be in my study. I am not to be disturbed." He strode away without another word, his boots echoing on the marble floor, leaving Beatrice standing in the cavernous hall feeling very small and very alone. Her chambers were magnificent and utterly impersonal, all cream silk and gilt furniture, with windows overlooking the formal gardens. A connecting door led to the Duke's apartments, she noted with a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was firmly closed, locked perhaps. That first night she dined alone in her rooms, and the second night, and the third. The Duke, it seemed, had no intention of acknowledging her existence beyond what was absolutely necessary. He took his meals in his study, rode out early each morning to inspect his estates, and returned late each evening, always careful to avoid any corridor she might occupy. It was, Beatrice realized, a form of punishment. He was making her invisible, erasing her from his life as thoroughly as one could erase a wife, without actually seeking an annulment. On the fourth day, she received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, bold and slightly untidy, written on expensive paper with a London address embossed at the top. "My dear niece," it began, and Beatrice's heart leapt. "I have heard the most extraordinary tale from your sister Catherine, who arrived on my doorstep in Edinburgh looking like a drowned cat and babbling about sacrifice and substitution. She has explained everything, and I must say, you are either the bravest young woman in England or the most foolish, possibly both. I'm returning to London for the season and insist you join me there immediately. A husband who ignores his wife is worse than no husband at all, and I'll not have you mouldering away in that dreary pile of stones playing the martyr. Come to me at Cavendish Square. We have much to discuss. Your affectionate aunt, Agatha Pembroke, Aunt Agatha." Her father's eldest sister, the family scandal who had refused 3 perfectly acceptable proposals before marrying a wealthy merchant, and then, after his death, had declined to remarry at all, choosing instead to live independently and scandalously in Edinburgh and London, hosting salons attended by artists and intellectuals and other unsuitable persons. Beatrice had met her only twice, but both times she had been fascinated by this woman who seemed to operate by entirely different rules than the rest of their family. She read the letter 3 times, then made her decision. The Duke was in his study when she knocked. She heard him call "Enter" in a tone that suggested he expected a servant, and the surprise on his face when she stepped inside was almost comical. "I'm going to London," she announced without preamble. "My aunt has invited me to stay with her for the season." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Your aunt, Lady Agatha Pembroke. She maintains a house in Cavendish Square." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps. "The blue-stocking. The independent woman of means," Beatrice corrected. "I will be leaving tomorrow morning." "Will you?" It wasn't a question. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold grey eyes. "And if I forbid it, then I will go anyway," Beatrice said, surprised by her own boldness. "You have made it abundantly clear that you have no use for me as a wife. Surely you cannot object to my removing myself from your presence." A muscle worked in his jaw. For a long moment he said nothing, and Beatrice wondered if she had pushed too far, if he would assert his legal right to control her movements, to keep her imprisoned in this beautiful, lonely house. "Go then," he said finally. "Enjoy London, enjoy your aunt's company, but understand this, madam, you are still my wife. You bear my name. Any scandal you create will reflect upon me, and I will not tolerate being made a fool of twice." "I have no intention of creating scandal," Beatrice said quietly. "I only wish to be somewhere I am not treated as though I don't exist." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice perhaps, or merely a trick of the light. "You should not have deceived me." "No," Beatrice agreed. "I should not have, but I did. And we must both live with the consequences. At least allow me to live with them somewhere other than here, where every room reminds me of my transgression and your contempt." He turned away, back to his papers. "Go to London. I don't care." But as Beatrice left the study, she could feel his eyes on her back. and she wondered if perhaps he cared more than he was willing to admit. Cavendish Square was a world away from Thornfield Hall. Aunt Agatha's townhouse was elegant but comfortable, filled with books and art and the constant flow of interesting visitors. Her aunt herself was a revelation, 50 years old, handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. "So," she said, pouring tea in her drawing-room on Beatrice's first afternoon, "you married a duke who hates you to save your sister from marrying a duke who hates her. Tell me, my dear, how is that an improvement?" Beatrice couldn't help but laugh, though it came out slightly strangled. "When you put it that way, it sounds rather foolish." "It sounds rather noble, actually," Agatha said, her tone softening. "Foolish and noble are often the same thing, but nobility doesn't keep you warm at night or give you a life worth living. What do you intend to do now?" "I don't know," Beatrice admitted. "I hadn't thought beyond the wedding itself." "Then it's time to start thinking." Agatha set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "You are a duchess, my dear, one of the most powerful women in England, whether your husband acknowledges you or not. You have wealth, position, and, if you'll forgive my saying so, a mind that's been wasted on watercolors and embroidery. It's time to use it." Over the following weeks, Aunt Agatha became the mentor Beatrice hadn't known she needed. She introduced her to a circle of women unlike any Beatrice had encountered: writers, reformers, women who ran charitable foundations and attended lectures at the Royal Society. They discussed philosophy and politics, art and literature, topics that would have made her mother faint with horror. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Beatrice began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, interested in her own life. It was at one of Agatha's salons, 6 weeks after her arrival in London, that she met Dr. Elias Reed. He was not what she expected when Agatha introduced him as a brilliant physician doing groundbreaking work in public health. He was young, perhaps 30, with unruly brown hair and warm hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His coat was well made but not fashionable, and he had ink stains on his fingers. "Your Grace," he said, bowing over her hand. "Lady Agatha has told me much about you." "Nothing too damning, I hope," Beatrice replied, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh. "On the contrary, she says you have a keen mind and a wasted education. I find that combination irresistible." They talked for 2 hours, standing by the window while the salon swirled around them. He told her about his work establishing free clinics in London's poorest neighbourhoods, about his theories on disease prevention and sanitation. She found herself telling him about her childhood fascination with natural philosophy, the books she'd read in secret, the questions she'd learned not to ask. "Why did you stop asking?" he wanted to know. "Because women aren't supposed to be curious," she said. "We're supposed to be decorative." "What a waste," he said simply. "Curiosity is the beginning of all progress. Without it, we'd still be living in caves." When he left that evening, he bowed over her hand again, but this time his smile held something warmer than mere courtesy. "I hope we'll meet again, Your Grace. I should very much like to continue our conversation." "As would I, Dr. Reed," Beatrice said, and meant it. That night, lying in her comfortable bed in Aunt Agatha's guest room, Beatrice realized something startling. She had gone an entire evening without thinking about the Duke, without feeling the weight of her deception, without dwelling on her failed marriage. She had felt, for the first time since her wedding day, like herself. The next morning, Agatha appeared at breakfast with a gleam in her eye. "The Duchess of Marlborough is hosting a charity gala next week, raising funds for a new hospital. Half of London society will be there. I think you should attend." "I'm not sure that's wise," Beatrice said carefully. The Duke is in Derbyshire, brooding in his study," Agatha interrupted. "You are in London and you are a duchess. It's time society saw you as such. Besides," she added with a sly smile, "Dr. Reed will be there. He's one of the physicians championing the hospital project." Beatrice felt a flutter in her chest that might have been anticipation. I suppose it would be rude to decline such an invitation. Extremely rude, Agatha agreed, her eyes twinkling. We'll need to get you a new gown. Something that makes a statement. What sort of statement? That you are not a woman to be ignored. As Beatrice sipped her tea, she caught her reflection in the silver pot, and for the first time in months she saw not a deceiver or a substitute or a disappointment, but simply herself. Beatrice. A woman with her own mind, her own interests, her own potential, and perhaps, just perhaps, her own future. The Duchess of Marlborough's gala was held at Devonshire House, its ballroom ablaze with 1,000 candles reflected in gilt mirrors that made the space seem infinite. Beatrice stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of deep sapphire silk that Aunt Agatha had insisted upon, elegant, sophisticated, and utterly unlike the pale pastels expected of young brides. Her dark hair was dressed simply but beautifully, with sapphires at her throat and ears that had belonged to the Thornfield family for generations. She had found them in her jewellery case with a curt note from the Duke's secretary. For your use as required by your position, even his gifts were cold. Ready? Aunt Agatha asked, resplendent in burgundy velvet beside her. Beatrice took a breath. Ready? They descended together, and Beatrice felt the moment the room noticed her. Conversations faltered, heads turned. She could almost hear the whispers, the new Duchess of Thornfield, the one who substituted for her sister. How extraordinary, how scandalous. Let them whisper, she thought. She had nothing left to lose. Your Grace. The Duchess of Marlborough swept forward, all warmth and curiosity. How delightful that you could attend. We've heard so much about you, though you've been quite elusive this season. I've been settling into my new role, Beatrice said smoothly, accepting the older woman's kiss on her cheek. But I couldn't miss such an important cause. The hospital project is vital work. Indeed. You must meet Dr. Reed. He's been instrumental in the planning. Oh, but I see you've already found him. Beatrice turned to find Elias Reed approaching, looking uncomfortable in formal evening dress, but smiling with genuine pleasure at seeing her. Your Grace, he said, bowing. You look magnificent. You look miserable, she replied, and was rewarded with his laugh. I detest these affairs, he admitted, but they're necessary evils when one needs funding. Would you care to escape to the terrace? I can bore you with details about surgical theatres and ventilation systems. That sounds infinitely more interesting than discussing the weather, Beatrice said, taking his offered arm. The terrace overlooked the gardens, lanterns strung between trees, creating pools of golden light. Other couples strolled the paths, but Elias led her to a quieter corner where they could speak without being overheard. I'm glad you came, he said. I wasn't sure you would. Why wouldn't I? He hesitated, then said carefully, There's been talk about your marriage, about the circumstances. Ah. Beatrice looked out over the gardens, her hands tightening on the balustrade. Yes, I imagine there has been. I don't care about gossip, Elias said firmly. I care about the woman I've come to know these past weeks, the one who asks brilliant questions about germ theory and actually listens to the answers. The one who suggested using illustrated pamphlets to teach hygiene to illiterate populations. An idea, by the way, that my colleagues thought was genius. Beatrice felt warmth bloom in her chest. You give me too much credit. I don't think I give you enough. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. You're wasted in a marriage that doesn't value you, Beatrice. You have so much to offer, so much intelligence and compassion and insight. You could do real good in this world if you chose to. I'm not sure a duchess is supposed to do good, she said wryly. We're supposed to host parties and wear jewels and produce heirs. Then perhaps it's time to redefine what a duchess can be. Before Beatrice could respond, a cold voice cut through the night air like a blade. How touching. They both turned to find the Duke of Thornfield standing in the terrace doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the ballroom. Beatrice's heart plummeted. She hadn't known he was in London, hadn't expected to see him here. Your Grace, Elias said, bowing stiffly. I was just discussing the hospital project with your wife. Were you? The Duke's eyes were chips of ice as he looked between them. How philanthropic. If you'll excuse us, Dr. Reed, I need a word with my wife. In private. It wasn't a request. Elias glanced at Beatrice, clearly reluctant to leave her, but she nodded slightly. He bowed again and retreated into the ballroom, though not without a backward glance of concern. When they were alone, the Duke closed the distance between them with predatory grace. So, this is how you spend your time in London, flirting with physicians on terraces. We were discussing public health initiatives, Beatrice said, lifting her chin. Not that it's any concern of yours. You made it quite clear you have no interest in my activities. You are my wife, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Everything you do is my concern, especially when you're making a spectacle of yourself with another man. A spectacle? Anger flared in Beatrice's chest, hot and bright. I was having a conversation. Something you've been unwilling to do since our wedding day. You've ignored me, avoided me, treated me like a ghost haunting your house, and now you dare to criticize me for finding companionship elsewhere. Companionship. He laughed harshly. Is that what you call it? I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him. With respect, Beatrice shot back. With interest? With basic human courtesy? Yes, guilty as charged. How dare I experience any of those things? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her defiance. She had been so meek at Thornfield, so willing to accept his coldness. But weeks with Aunt Agatha, weeks of intellectual stimulation and genuine friendship, had reminded her that she was more than just a substitute bride. You deceived me, he said, but there was less venom in it now. You stood at that altar and lied. I saved my family, Beatrice countered, and I fulfilled your contract. You got your Ashford bride, your political alliance, your revenge on my father. What more do you want from me? I want... He broke off, his jaw clenching. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, almost human. I don't know what I want. The admission hung between them, unexpected and raw. Then perhaps, Beatrice said quietly, you should determine that before you come here throwing accusations. I have done nothing wrong. I have been a faithful wife to a husband who wishes I didn't exist. If you cannot bear to see me finding some small measure of happiness in my exile, then perhaps you should return to Derbyshire and continue ignoring me from a distance. She moved to step past him, back toward the ballroom, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not painfully, but firmly. Wait. She stopped, looking up at him. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. He was not as composed as he pretended to be. You're right, he said, and the words seemed to cost him. I have treated you abominably. You didn't deserve that. Beatrice blinked, stunned. Are you apologizing? Don't sound so shocked. I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong. He released her wrist but didn't step back. I was angry at your family, at the situation, at being trapped in a marriage I didn't choose. I took that anger out on you, and that was unjust. Yes, Beatrice said. It was. But seeing you tonight, seeing you with him, he shook his head. I realized something. You're not Catherine. You never were. And perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. High praise indeed, Beatrice said dryly, though her heart was beating faster. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Catherine would never have had the courage to do what you did, to sacrifice herself for her sister, to face my anger, to build a life for herself despite my cruelty. He paused. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I'm stronger than I gave myself credit for, Beatrice admitted. They stood there in the lantern light, the sounds of the gala drifting out from the ballroom, and for the first time since their wedding, Beatrice felt as though she was actually seeing her husband, not as an enemy or a punishment, but as a complicated, flawed man who had been as trapped by their circumstances as she was. I have a proposition, the Duke said finally. Return to Thornfield with me, not as a prisoner or a ghost, but as my wife, my true wife. Let us begin again, without the anger and resentment. Let us see if we might make something bearable of this marriage." Beatrice's breath caught. "Why? Why now?" "Because watching you tonight I realized I've been a fool. I've had a duchess of intelligence and courage under my roof, and I've wasted her. I've wasted us both." His grey eyes met hers, and for the first time they weren't cold. "I'm not promising love. I'm not even promising affection, but I am promising respect, partnership, a chance." It was more than she had ever expected from him, more than she had dared to hope for. But she thought of Elias, of his warm eyes and genuine interest. She thought of Aunt Agatha's salon, of the life she was building in London. She thought of the woman she was becoming, free from the constraints of Thornfield. "I need time," she said, "to think, to decide if that's what I want." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. I'll be staying at Thornfield House in Mayfair for the next week. If you decide you're willing to try, come to me there. If not—" He stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. "If not, I'll arrange for a formal separation. You can keep the London house, a generous allowance. You'll have your freedom." "You would do that?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "I would. You deserve at least that much." He bowed, formal and correct. "Good evening, Your Grace. I hope you enjoy the remainder of the gala." He left her standing on the terrace, her mind whirling with possibilities. When she returned to the ballroom, Elias found her immediately. "Are you all right?" He didn't. "I'm fine," Beatrice assured him. "We just actually talked for the first time." "And?" Elias asked carefully. "And I don't know what happens next," Beatrice admitted. "But for the first time since my wedding day, I feel as though I have a choice." Elias smiled, though there was something wistful in it. "Then I hope you choose whatever makes you happy, Beatrice, even if it's not what I might wish for." As the evening wore on, Beatrice danced and conversed and played the role of Duchess with newfound confidence, but her mind kept returning to the Duke's words, to the possibility he'd offered. A chance, a partnership, a beginning. Was it enough? Could it be? She didn't know, but for the first time, she was eager to find out. Beatrice spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with her decision. She walked the length of Aunt Agatha's drawing room so many times she feared she might wear a path in the carpet. She wrote letters she never sent, arguments for and against laid out in careful columns that solved nothing. On the 4th morning, Agatha found her staring out the window at the grey London sky, a cold cup of tea forgotten at her elbow. "You're still here," her aunt observed, settling into the chair opposite. "I rather thought you'd have made a decision by now." "How do I choose between a life I'm building and a marriage that might become bearable?" Beatrice asked. "Between certainty and possibility? My dear girl, there is no certainty in this life, only choices and their consequences." Agatha leaned forward, her expression unusually serious. "But I will tell you this, running from a marriage is easy. I should know. I've counseled enough women to do it. What's difficult is staying and fighting for something better. The question is, do you believe your husband is capable of change? And more importantly, are you willing to risk your newfound happiness to find out?" Beatrice thought of the Duke on the terrace, the vulnerability in his admission, the respect in his offer. She thought of Thornfield Hall, no longer a prison but perhaps a canvas upon which she might paint her own life. And she thought of the woman she had become these past weeks, stronger, more certain of her own worth. That woman, she realized, was not afraid of a challenge. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would regret not trying." Agatha smiled. "Then go to him. But go as yourself, Beatrice, not as a substitute for Catherine, not as a meek and apologetic bride, but as the Duchess of Thornfield in your own right. Make him meet you as an equal, or don't meet him at all." Thornfield House in Mayfair was smaller than the Derbyshire estate, but no less imposing. An elegant Georgian townhouse with black railings and window boxes that needed tending. Beatrice arrived in the afternoon, her heart hammering against her ribs as Pemberton opened the door. "Your Grace," the butler said, and if he was surprised to see her, he hid it masterfully. "His Grace is in the library. Shall I announce you?" "No," Beatrice said, surprising herself. "I'll announce myself." She found him standing by the window, much as she had been that morning, staring out at nothing. He had removed his coat, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, in a gesture of informality she had never seen from him. It made him look younger, less formidable. "I've decided," she said from the doorway. He turned, and she saw hope flash across his face before he schooled it into neutrality. "And? I'll return to Thornfield. I'll try to make this marriage work." She stepped into the room, her spine straight, her voice steady, but on certain conditions. His eyebrows rose. "Conditions?" "I am not Catherine," Beatrice said firmly. "I will never be the placid, decorative wife you might have wanted. I have interests beyond embroidery and watercolors. I want to be involved in the management of the estates. I want to establish a school for the tenants' children. I want to continue my association with Dr. Reed's hospital project as a patroness and fundraiser, nothing more," she added quickly, seeing his expression darken. "I want a marriage of partnership, not ownership. And I want your word that you will treat me with respect, even when we disagree." The Duke was silent for a long moment, studying her with those grey eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. Then slowly he crossed the room until he stood before her. "You've changed," he said. "In just these few weeks, you've become someone different." "No," Beatrice corrected. "I've become myself, perhaps for the first time." "I like it," he said simply. "And yes, to all of your conditions, I agree." Relief and trepidation warred in Beatrice's chest. "Just like that? Just like that?" He held out his hand. "Shall we begin again then, properly this time?" Beatrice placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Alexander," she said, testing his given name for the first time. "Beatrice," he replied, and something in the way he said it, with attention, with intention, made her breath catch. The journey back to Derbyshire was different from the first. They travelled together in the carriage, and though the conversation was stilted at first, gradually they began to talk. He told her about the estates, the challenges of managing so much land and so many tenants. She told him about her ideas for the school, about what she had learned from Elias about public health and education. "You're passionate about this," Alexander observed, watching her face animate as she spoke. "I am," Beatrice admitted. "For so long I was told my thoughts didn't matter, that my interests were inappropriate. But they do matter, and I want to use my position to make a difference." "Then you shall," he said. "I meant what I said about partnership. Your ideas are sound. We'll implement them." When they arrived at Thornfield Hall, the staff assembled as before, but this time Alexander kept her hand in his as they entered. "Mrs. Daventry," he said to the housekeeper, "Her Grace will be taking an active role in the household management. Please arrange a meeting tomorrow morning to review the accounts and discuss any concerns." The housekeeper's eyes widened fractionally, but she curtsied. "Of course, Your Grace." That evening, they dined together for the first time, not in the formal dining room, but in the smaller family parlour, with only 2 footmen attending. The conversation flowed more easily now, touching on books they had read, places they had travelled, opinions on everything from agricultural reform to the latest political scandals. "I didn't know you were interested in politics," Beatrice said, surprised by his progressive views on certain reforms. "There's a great deal we don't know about each other," Alexander replied. "I propose we remedy that." After dinner, he walked her to her chambers. At the door he paused, and Beatrice felt her pulse quicken. But he merely raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was far more intimate than their wedding kiss had been. "Good night, Beatrice," he said softly. "Thank you for giving us this chance." "Good night, Alexander," she whispered. The weeks that followed were a revelation. They fell into a routine of breakfasting together, discussing estate business, riding out to visit tenants. Alexander was true to his word. He listened to her ideas, implemented her suggestions, treated her as a partner rather than an ornament. The school project moved forward rapidly. They converted an unused building on the estate, hired 2 teachers, and opened enrollment to all tenant children, regardless of their parents' ability to pay. On opening day, Beatrice stood beside Alexander as 23 children filed in, their faces bright with curiosity and hope. "You did this," Alexander murmured. "This is your vision made real." "We did this," Beatrice corrected, and felt his hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. It was during a visit to the village that they encountered Charlotte Ashford, Beatrice's cousin, who had been Catherine's closest friend and had always treated Beatrice with thinly veiled condescension. She was shopping with her mother when she spotted them, and her expression cycled through shock, disdain, and something that might have been envy. "Cousin Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How surprising to see you here. I had heard you were quite miserable in your marriage, that the Duke could barely stand to look at you." Beatrice felt Alexander stiffen beside her, but she squeezed his hand gently and smiled at Charlotte with genuine warmth. "How kind of you to be concerned, Charlotte, but as you can see, the rumors were greatly exaggerated. I'm quite content." "Content," Charlotte repeated, her eyes narrowing. "How modest. I suppose one must adjust one's expectations when one traps a husband through deception." "Charlotte," her mother hissed, mortified, but Alexander stepped forward, his voice cold as winter frost. "I would advise you to guard your tongue, Miss Ashford. You are speaking to the Duchess of Thornfield, and I will not tolerate disrespect toward my wife. Whatever the circumstances of our marriage, Beatrice has proven herself to be everything a duchess should be: intelligent, compassionate, and far more gracious than you deserve." Charlotte's face flushed scarlet. She curtsied stiffly and hurried away, her mother apologizing profusely as they departed. When they were alone, Beatrice turned to Alexander, her eyes bright. "You defended me." Of course I did," he said, looking puzzled. "You're my wife." "No," Beatrice said softly. "You defended me because you meant it, because you believe it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I do." That night, the connecting door between their chambers opened for the first time. Alexander stood in the doorway, uncertain in a way she had never seen him. "May I come in?" he asked. Beatrice's heart raced, but she nodded. He crossed to where she sat by the fire, still in her dressing gown, and knelt beside her chair. "I know this marriage began badly," he said. "I know I gave you every reason to hate me, but these past weeks, getting to know you, working beside you, Beatrice, you've become important to me, more important than I ever expected." "You've become important to me as well," she admitted. He reached up, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "May I kiss you? Properly this time, not in anger or punishment, but because I want to." "Yes," Beatrice whispered. The kiss was nothing like their wedding kiss. It was soft, questioning, full of possibility. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "Stay," Beatrice said. "Tonight, stay with me." And he did. The next morning, Beatrice woke to find Alexander already dressed, standing by the window with a letter in his hand. His expression was troubled. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "Your father," he said quietly. "He's written to request a meeting. He wants to apologize, he says, for forcing the marriage, for the circumstances. He's heard about the school, about our work together. He wants to make amends." Beatrice's first instinct was refusal, but then she thought of the woman she had become, of the strength she had found, of the marriage she and Alexander were building from the ashes of deception and anger. "Then let him come," she said. "Let him see what we've made of his machinations. Let him see that his daughter, the one he thought was too clever, too difficult, has become a duchess worth respecting." Alexander smiled, crossing to the bed and pulling her into his arms. "You were always worth respecting, Beatrice. I was simply too blind to see it." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, kissing her forehead, "I see you perfectly clearly. And I am grateful every day that Catherine fled, because it brought me you. It was, Beatrice thought, the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. 8 months had passed since that morning when Alexander had held her in his arms and spoken words that had healed wounds Beatrice hadn't known she carried. 8 months of transformation, of growth, of building something neither of them had imagined possible on that terrible wedding day. Autumn had painted the Derbyshire landscape in shades of amber and gold, and Thornfield Hall had become something Beatrice had never expected, a home. She stood now in the doorway of the estate school, watching as Miss Pemberton led the children through their arithmetic lessons. The building hummed with energy and laughter, so different from the silent, unused structure it had been. 42 children now attended, more than double the original enrollment, and they had already hired a third teacher to manage the growing numbers. "Your Grace," Miss Pemberton called, noticing her, "would you like to hear the children's recitations? They've been practicing all week." Beatrice smiled, entering the bright, warm classroom. "I would be delighted." As she listened to the children recite poetry and demonstrate their reading skills, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was real. This was lasting. These children would have opportunities their parents never had, and it was because she had refused to accept the limitations placed upon her. After the recitations, a small girl named Emma approached shyly, holding out a drawing. "I made this for you, Your Grace. It's you and the Duke at the Harvest Festival." The drawing was charmingly crude. 2 stick figures holding hands, surrounded by what might have been sheaves of wheat or possibly very tall flowers. But the care taken with it was evident in every careful line. "It's beautiful, Emma," Beatrice said, kneeling to the child's level. "Thank you. I shall treasure it always." As she left the school, the drawing carefully tucked into her reticule, she found Alexander waiting by the gate with 2 horses saddled and ready. "I thought you might like to ride out to the North Fields," he said, helping her mount. "The new drainage system is complete, and I want your opinion on the results." This too had become their pattern, consulting each other, valuing each other's perspectives, working together as true partners. The estate had flourished under their joint management, and the tenants had begun to look at Beatrice not as the substitute duchess, but as their duchess in truth. As they rode through the golden afternoon, Alexander reached over and took her hand. "I received a letter from Dr. Reed this morning. The hospital opened last week. He wanted us to know that our contribution made it possible." "Our contribution," Beatrice repeated, warmth spreading through her chest. She had worried, initially, about maintaining her friendship with Elias after returning to Thornfield, but Alexander had surprised her by suggesting they become patrons of the hospital project together, channeling her interest into something they could share. "He also mentioned that he's engaged," Alexander added, watching her carefully, "to a Miss Sarah Winters, a nurse at one of his clinics." "How wonderful," Beatrice said, and meant it. What she had felt for Elias had been gratitude and intellectual kinship, not love. She understood that now. "We should send a gift." Alexander's expression softened with relief and something deeper, trust, perhaps, or the security that came from knowing they had built something solid. "You're happy," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I am. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Even though you were forced into this marriage, even though I treated you so abominably at first." Beatrice considered this, guiding her horse around a fallen branch. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the worst circumstances lead us to the best destinations. If Catherine hadn't fled, if you hadn't been so cold, if I hadn't gone to Aunt Agatha, we might never have found this. We might have remained strangers sharing a house, going through the motions of marriage without ever discovering what we could be together." "A rather optimistic view of my cruelty," Alexander said wryly. "Not optimistic, realistic. We're both different people than we were 8 months ago. Better people, I think." She met his eyes. "You've taught me that I'm stronger than I believed, that my ideas have value, that I deserve to be heard and respected." And you've taught me that strength isn't the same as coldness, that opening one's heart isn't weakness. He brought her hand to his lips. That love can grow even in the most unlikely soil. Love. He had said it so casually, but it was the first time either of them had spoken the word aloud. Beatrice's breath caught. "Love," she whispered. Alexander drew his horse closer until their knees touched. "Yes, love. I love you, Beatrice. Your intelligence, your courage, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to be diminished. I love the woman you are and the woman you're becoming. I love the life we're building together." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "I should have said it sooner. I should have—" "I love you too," Beatrice interrupted, her eyes bright with tears. "I think I have for months, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid it was too soon, too unlikely, too—" He kissed her then, there in the middle of the field, with the autumn sun warm on their faces and the horses stamping impatiently beneath them. It was a kiss full of promise and certainty, of past pain transformed into present joy. When they finally drew apart, both were laughing. "We're terrible at this," Alexander said, "both of us too cautious, too afraid of vulnerability." "Then we'll learn together," Beatrice replied. "We'll be terrible at it together until we become good at it." That evening, they hosted a dinner party, something that had become a monthly tradition. Aunt Agatha had come from London, along with several of the friends Beatrice had made during her time there. The conversation ranged from politics to literature to the latest scientific discoveries, and the dining room rang with laughter and spirited debate. "You've done well for yourself, niece," Agatha murmured to Beatrice as they retired to the drawing room after dinner. "When you left London, I wasn't certain you were making the right choice. But seeing you now, seeing you both together, I was wrong to doubt." "You gave me the strength to make that choice," Beatrice said. "You reminded me of my own worth. I'll always be grateful for that." "And I'll always be grateful that you proved me wrong about the Duke," Agatha replied with a smile. "He's far less insufferable than I expected." Later, as the guests departed and the house settled into quiet, Beatrice and Alexander stood together in the library, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the fire burn low. "Do you ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked softly. "Our wedding day." "Often," Alexander admitted. "I think about how angry I was, how betrayed I felt, how certain I was that you had ruined my life. And now I think you saved it." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a true partner, an equal, someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better. If Catherine had been at that altar, we would have had a perfectly civil, perfectly empty marriage. But you, Beatrice, you gave me the possibility of something real." "We gave each other that possibility," Beatrice corrected. "You could have remained cold and distant. You could have refused to see me as anything but a deceiver. But you chose to try. You chose to change. That took courage, too." "Then we're both brave fools," Alexander said with a smile. "The best kind of fools," Beatrice agreed. A week later, a carriage arrived bearing an unexpected visitor, Catherine. Beatrice's sister stepped out, looking windswept and anxious, her eyes searching until they found Beatrice on the front steps. "Bea," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry for what I did to you, for the burden I placed on you, for—" Beatrice descended the steps and pulled her sister into an embrace. "Hush. There's nothing to forgive." "But I ruined your life," Catherine sobbed against her shoulder. "I was a coward, and you paid the price." "You didn't ruin my life," Beatrice said firmly, drawing back to look at her sister. "You gave me a different life than I expected, yes. But Catherine, I'm happy. Truly, genuinely happy." "Are you?" Catherine wiped her eyes, nodding. "Aunt Agatha has been wonderful. She's introduced me to so many people, helped me discover interests I never knew I had. I'm studying art now, actually studying it, not just dabbling. And there's a man, a painter, who—" She blushed. "But that's not important. I came to see if you could ever forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Beatrice repeated. You made a choice that was right for you. And inadvertently you made a choice that was right for me too. I won't pretend the beginning wasn't difficult, but Catherine, I wouldn't change it now, not for anything. Alexander appeared in the doorway, and Catherine stiffened, clearly expecting anger or recrimination. But he simply bowed and said, "Lady Catherine, welcome to Thornfield. Any sister of Beatrice's is welcome here." The relief on Catherine's face was palpable. Over tea in the drawing room, the three of them talked for hours, about the past, about the present, about the futures they were each building. And when Catherine finally departed, promising to visit again soon, Beatrice felt as though a final weight had been lifted. "You're extraordinary," Alexander said, watching the carriage disappear down the drive. "She abandoned you to a fate she couldn't face, and you harbor no resentment at all." "How could I?" Beatrice asked. "Her choice led me to you, led me to this life, led me to become the woman I was always meant to be." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We're all exactly where we're supposed to be." As winter approached and the first snow began to fall over Derbyshire, Beatrice stood at the window of her sitting room, no longer a guest in these chambers, but their rightful occupant, and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. She had taken her sister's vows to spare her, had wed a duke who had sworn to despise her family. She had been humiliated, ignored, and dismissed, but she had also discovered her own strength, found her own voice, and built a marriage based not on obligation or convenience, but on genuine partnership and love. The woman who had stood trembling at that altar 8 months ago would hardly recognize the woman she had become, confident, purposeful, beloved. Alexander entered, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About blooming where you're planted," Beatrice said softly. "About how sometimes the soil that seems least promising produces the most beautiful flowers." "Poetic," he murmured against her hair. "And true." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Thornfield in white. But inside, in the warmth of their shared life, Beatrice had never felt more certain of anything. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. Not the life she had planned, not the life anyone had expected, but hers nonetheless, gloriously, perfectly, completely hers. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I'd love to know how far this tale of courage, transformation, and unexpected love has traveled. Until next time, may you all find the courage to bloom wherever you're planted.